Alright. Hi everyone. Welcome to the replay. So today I'm going to show you all a replay I recorded in my Hipper. This game is actually my highest damage so far in the Hipper. I'm gonna finish with around 160,000 damage in this game. Let me just turn down my desktop audio here. Okay, so right now I'm just gonna walk through sort of my essential thought process going into this game. What decisions I tried to make that resulted in me being able to have that much, end with as much damage as I did. So early on, I'm thinking about trying to help this destroyer contest A. What I want to kind of do is get up to the island in around the F4, E4 region. And I kind of want to just get up there. There's not really anything in B that's going to cause me significant harm. So I'm really thinking that if I'm able to get up to that island and just kind of angle against this Scharnhorst and the Cleveland, I'll be able to stay mostly safe while also contesting against the Mahon. Now you'll notice I grabbed a Citadel there in the Cleveland. This Hipper AP is, and I've talked about this before when discussing the Hipper, but this Hipper AP is really brutal. When you shoot at really broadside anything, you can really, really hurt them. And there's the Scharnhorst shooting at me. Luckily I'm angled so his shots aren't doing too much. I'm going to launch my spotter plane. The reason I'm going to launch my, well, not my spotter, I'm using it as a spotter. I'm launching my fighter plane. Now, when I'm creeping up on islands like this, I really, really like to use the fighter plane to try and spot things over the island. You'll notice I'm being targeted by a lot of ships, but I just kind of don't really care right now. The only battleships that are there I'm angled sharply into. So, for example, the Scharnhorst just bounce off of me. Now the Graf Spee is going to shoot me, but again, I don't really care. It's not a lot of damage, and I can have a lot of hit points, and I'm in a pretty good position. And then the Warspite shows up. Now, I didn't actually expect the Warspite to be there. So at this point, I'm thinking, alright, I have a choice, basically. Do I try and disengage from this situation? And I think I'm just going to try and ground here, basically. Do I try and disengage from this situation? Do I try and get into A and cap it? Or do I just sort of stay here and try and do stuff? My plan, initially, is to try and kind of sneaky into A. And the reason I think that's going to work is because if I reverse into A, I'm not going to be able to get shot by the battleships, the Gneisenau, the Scharnhorst, and the Warspite. And I'll be able to quickly disengage if I really need to. Unfortunately, something's going to happen, and I haven't seen this replay in a little while, so I'll have to remember what it is. But something's going to happen that's actually going to force me out of this cap circle. I'm actually okay with taking that fire, because I have the stealth to... And then, of course, he immediately sets me on fire with the next shot. So that was pretty unlucky. The plan was gonna be to use my concealment to just sort of sit here in A unspotted and just cap it. As it stands, though, that's not gonna be able to happen. Because now that the Cleveland set me on fire, my base detection range is a lot higher. And so what that means is that I'm essentially gonna have to evacuate this cap circle because, like... when we have two destroyers here, it's not worth it for me to try and sacrifice a ton of hit points just to contest a cap. Yeah, maybe we get the cap a little earlier, but the North Carolina and the Fushan are going to push in anyway. Maybe I get the capture, like, a minute before I otherwise would have, but it's at the expense of way more hit points than I personally am willing to spend in order to win this. And, you know, looking at the map, they already have two capture points. They have really good map position. I don't want to expend all my hit points right now because I anticipate that I'm going to need to carry later, and I'm going to be right. So it's just one of those situations where I really don't think it's worth trying to contest the cap circle. At least trying to sit physically in the cap circle. I still want to contest it, but the difference is I want to contest it from outside the cap circle rather than physically capping it myself because it's too much of a risk for me to do. So anyway, now I'm just shooting AP at this Scharnhorst. You'll notice that every time I fire, I kind of angle back in, right? I try and minimize the amount of flat angle he has to shoot at. I am giving my bow to him, which isn't great. Or my stern, sorry. But it's not going to be a huge issue because I'm sailing away from him. I'm a harder target to hit. I'm pretty far away, so his accuracy is really going to show up. And I can constantly angle really, really quickly against his shells. So now the North Carolina's in the cap circle. Again, at this point, I could be up there helping him. But I want to be in a position to stop the enemy team that's pushing through B. If I'm sitting in A, I'm not necessarily going to be able to influence B very much, and I think A is going to get capped, right? The question is simply how fast. And I don't think it's worth me capping A slightly faster to like, I don't think it's worth sacrificing the damage that I could get in B and the protecting of B that I could be getting, because B is absolutely not necessarily a decided question right now. We just have a Nelson and a Warspite, but they have a Scharnhorst and a bunch of cruisers in C that could easily flex around. So I'm thinking that B is where I want to be. You know, I want to put damage into this Graf Spee. I want to put damage into this Fuchsia, and I want to help my team cap B actively. And I don't think the North Carolina really needs my help capping A at this point in the game. So that's why I'm not trying to be an A right now. So anyway, now I'm essentially just going to try and fight this Graf Spee. He's going to shoot AP at me, but it's going to bounce because I'm angled. And so I'm just going to farm this Graf Spee as he pushes through. He's going to die pretty soon. But then after the Graf Spee goes down, I'm going to switch to this Scharnhorst. And this is why I flexed around to B instead of staying by A physically to help the North Carolina cap it out. Right? Because now I'm getting more damage, and I'm having more of an impact for the team. Right? I mean, you saw how quickly A went just by having one ship in there. I don't need to be there. Right? I maybe increase the capture time by like 30 seconds. That's not worth it. So anyway, right now I'm kind of staying at long range. I don't want to be where that Indianapolis is, because you'll notice that they have a bunch of ships pushing in from C. Right? They have the Kiai, they have the Chapayev, they have the Helena. And I really don't want to be in a position where I have to fight those guys on my own. So I'm just going to kind of try and sort of sit out here and just pummel this Scharnhorst. I want to deal with this Scharnhorst before I deal with the guys in C, because right now the Scharnhorst is creating a crossfire with the guys in C, and that's really not something we want right now. Okay, so right now, looking at the map, what do I want to try and do? I want to try and maximize my damage, and I want to try and win the game. So in order to win the game, we need caps, right? We're down on caps right now. They have more than we do, and they have more points than we do because of it. So we need to rectify that situation. And if I want to have a good game, I also need to deal damage. So what that means is two things. One, I need to put myself in a position to help B get capped, and I need to put myself in a position to shoot the enemies as they push in from C. So what I do is I leave myself in this kind of position, sort of back here behind where our battleships are, right? I don't want to fight the enemy ships pushing in from C, one on 5 or whatever. And I don't want to fight them face to face, because I really just don't need to, right? There's no reason for me to put myself in an aggressive position right now. So I'm just going to sit here and farm the Scharnhorst, and then farm the enemies as they push in. Unfortunately, the Bayard goes down. That's not really good, because now we're down on ships. But luckily for us, the Scharnhorst also goes down, so now we're up on ships. And now we want to think about capping B, right? Their battleships have mostly just kind of milled around in C. They haven't pushed in aggressively like they really should be doing right now. Because they want to stop us from taking B. If we can take B, we can sort of start shifting the momentum in our favor. But the enemy hasn't really been super proactive about trying to stop us. Effectively, the Scharnhorst has tried. I think the Scharnhorst pushed in way too aggressively, personally. But that's neither here nor there. He pushed in, and he died trying to defend B. I don't think it was a good play for him to do that, but that's what happened. The other problem going on right now is they have a Cleveland up north, and that guy really needs to die. As long as he's alive, he can stop the Moss from doing things, and he can just sort of, you know, gradually poke at our team as we're trying to push into B. And we don't really want that. So I took an opportunity and quickly feathered a shot over at him. You'll notice I'm shooting AP at the Kiai. That's because, again, the AP on the ship is really, really brutal. So now I'm going to try and take out this Cleveland. Unfortunately, the Kiai, I believe, turns, and so a lot of my shots bounce and shatter, which is really not ideal. Anyway, so there's that Hipper armor for you. The Hipper is not a super tanky cruiser, but it's relatively tanky. You do have a reasonably well-protected citadel, and your belt armor is reasonably good, and you can bow tank certain battleships if you need to. Which does make the ship pretty resilient, and in my experience makes this ship relatively good at carrying. Anyway, so the Cleveland goes down, which is really, really good. With the Cleveland down, now we can be a little bit more aggressive against these guys, because we don't have to worry about being shot from multiple angles. So I'm just going to start putting HE into this guy. I fire an AP volley, sort of out of hope. If I can manage to aim and hit the superstructure, that would be great. But at this point, I really want to set fires. You notice this guy just ate corpse, which means if he wants... Either he's already used his damage con and he's going to be taking a ton of damage, or he's going to use it now to repair the torpedo damage, which means I have an opportunity to start setting fires, which I really want to do. So that's what I start doing. The other thing I'm thinking about doing, you'll notice that I'm sailing towards the B cap, and that's because I kind of want to cap B. Right this very second, I don't think there's really much of an opportunity for me to push into B directly at this moment. And the reason for that is because you'll notice they have 2 battleships and a bunch of cruisers, 3 battleships, sorry, and a bunch of cruisers up there. And our battleships are kind of playing a little bit passive in G5, which I think is correct, but what it means is that I don't have an opportunity to push either. The reason I think this play is correct is because they have more numbers than we do concentrated on this flank, right? Our Gneisenau now is so far back that if our North Carolina, by the way, who's almost dead, and our Nelson try and push up, they're just going to die really, really quickly. So I think they're actually playing right by not being too aggressive right now. What we need to be doing is letting the enemy push in and farming them as they push in. So anyway, the reason I can't take B is because our battleships can't play too aggressively, they're not able to create space for me to push in. So space is a concept that's important in a lot of games when you have a sort of tanky type class, but essentially one of the roles of battleships in World of Warships, and there's a 7k AP volley on the Queen Elizabeth, but essentially one of the roles of battleships in World of Warships is to try and create space for cruisers. Because a battleship is such a force and has so much just powerful map control, battleships have the ability, just by being in a position, to draw enemy fire and create space for the cruisers to sort of exist and play more aggressively. But because the battleships aren't being able to play aggressive, I don't have the ability to play up aggressive into B, because I don't have the space isn't there to do so, right? It's not a zone that I can enter because their battleships are there forcing me to leave it. So anyway, right now I'm just firing AP at this broadside Ki. The Ki is kind of ignoring me, which is really not something that he wants to be doing. And the reason it's not something he wants to be doing is because I can just ruin him with my AP over and over and over and over again. And there's really not much he can do about it. I don't know what our Gneisenau is doing. He's way back in A. He's playing so passive. You know, I think our Nelson is playing a little bit better. He's present, but he's not being too aggressive in killing himself. I don't really understand what the Gneisenau is doing. But right now I'm just trying to sort of focus the Ki. You notice another thing about my positioning here. This is actually important to point out. But you notice that I position myself so that the only target I'm actually shooting at is the Ki, but also the only target who can shoot me back is also the Ki, right? I'm in a position where I'm essentially isolating my targets, right? So, and I'm sort of exposing myself a little bit to the Gneisenau here too, but I'm going to try and put myself out of that position. But the way I'm isolating my targets is I'm sort of placing myself at this island so that I shoot at the enemy that is farthest out to the right. And I'm using the island to block myself from the rest of the enemy team. The reason that's really important is because it basically will allows me to turn what is ostensibly almost a 3 or 4v1 or a 4v2 into a 1v1. Because the Chapayev, the other cruiser that was behind there as well, couldn't really shoot me. Because I was using that island as cover. And so that's one way for you to sort of isolate enemies even when you are in a situation that is technically 1v many. So anyway, now I'm going to try and shoot this Chapayev. I'm a little bit worried about taking this fight just because, you know, it is a Chapayev, and Chapayevs do have really good HE DPM. So I'm going to try and be kind of cautious here. I'm also getting shot by the Gneisenau. What I'm trying to do ostensibly is get behind this island to my right, so I can use that as cover between me and the Gneisenau. So I'm going to try and hit this Chapayev with torpedoes. I'm worried I'm going to die here, but fortunately for me, the Chapayev is actually going to get hit by Nelson AP. Part of the reason I felt like I could make that play is because I knew we had a Nelson back there who would be able to shoot the Chapayev if he pushed into me. And that's basically exactly what happened. The Chapayev tried to push me, but in so doing, he got broadsided by the Nelson. Okay, so now I'm fighting this Gneisenau around the island. And at this point I'm thinking, okay, I'm already at 126k damage, but I have an opportunity to get some crazy damage with torpedoes. So I notice that the Gneisenau is turning, and I'm actually going to drop my torpedoes a little bit ahead of where his reticle displays, because I know that his ship is turning, which means that he'll eventually turn into my torpedoes. And so that's what I'm going to try and do in this situation. I'm just going to try and use this island as cover, try and catch this Gneisenau. You notice that when I fired the torpedoes, he was actually slightly outside my torpedo range, but by looking at the minimap, looking at where his ship is pointing, looking at where the sort of little direction indicator of the ship is, I can tell where his ship is going to be in a few seconds. And so I can use that to predict where I should launch my torpedoes, and if I can hit him with torpedoes. And so I get an additional 26,000 damage on the Gneisenau with my torps, and I'm eventually just going to finish him off. Okay, so a couple big takeaways from this game. The first big takeaway from this game is that really map positioning is very, very important for being able to do damage. If your goal is to do a lot of damage in a game, what you really want to be trying to do is trying to put yourself in positions where you can shoot the enemy while not killing yourself. So in a ship like the Hipper, what that means is using your angling, using your armor, and using islands and such to sort of isolate your targets, using islands as cover, using angling, using kiting to try and get away from enemies while also being able to shoot at them. You'll notice there were a lot of moments where I was using islands in that game to isolate my targets when I was facing multiple enemies, especially towards the end when I was just sitting behind that island and making sure that I could only see and shoot at one enemy at a time. And that way I wasn't being shot at by 4 enemies at once, I was just being shot at by 1 enemy at once. So that's a way that you can use islands cover to try and protect yourself during those kinds of situations. Another important takeaway from this game is when you need to prioritize your hit points over taking a cap. So in that situation, we would probably have lost if I had stayed in the cap circle early trying to cap it against that Cleveland. Because what would have happened is I would have lost a bunch more hit points. We might have taken the cap a little earlier, but it really wasn't worth it because then I would have died later on in the game when I needed to carry and push against the Chapayev and make sure that Chapayev died and make sure the Gneisenau died. And because I was able to conserve my hit points early on, we were able to come back and win the game later. A lot of players seem to think that taking caps, yes, taking caps early is really important, but when it comes down to sacrificing your ship to take a cap, it's almost never worth it. Even if I'm going to be spending a quarter or half of my hit points to take a cap circle in a cruiser, a lot of times I'm not really willing to do that, especially if I think we're going to take the cap circle anyway on that flank, right? If they have overwhelming superiority on that flank, me killing myself to try and contest a cap isn't going to be worth it. And if we have overwhelming superiority on that flank, there's no reason for me to do a ton of damage to myself to take the cap, because if I do that, what's going to happen is we're going to cap anyway eventually, and I'm just spending my hit points essentially for 30 more seconds a point game off the cap circle. So those are a couple of the big takeaways from this game. There's a couple other minor things. If you want me to go really deep into analysis of a replay, I can do that, but I don't really have a lot of time to do those kinds of in-depth reviews. But if you like this kind of content, be sure to drop a like, give me a subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Thanks.